I must keep stressing in these videos that since the year 2000, more than 350 books have been published explaining in detail the falsification of theism, Christianity especially. This has never happened before, ever. Please tell your Christian friends that they have a lot of homework to do. They haven't noticed. My name is David Madison, the 12th of February 2020. I'm an ex-clergy atheist, and I have collected these titles into what I call the Cure for Christianity Library, in homage to Mark Twain's famous comment that the best cure for Christianity is reading the Bible. Now, there are a lot more books to help with that. Just type Cure for Christianity Library into Google. There are a lot of amazing insights in these books, hence this series of videos, Cure for Christianity Knockout Quotes. This is quote number 15. In Volume 2 of David Fitzgerald's 3-volume work, Jesus, Mything in Action, we find this comment, quote, "In much of Mark's Gospel, Jesus scolds his disciples for being clueless, missing the point of his teachings, being slothful, and even disobedient. Yet these dim, lazy disciples are supposed to be the same ones who carefully memorized all these stories about how incompetent they were. You can't have your dutifully memorized cake and cluelessly eat it too." Unquote. The Gospels were written 40 to 80 years after Jesus, and that's a problem. Since there is no documentation at all by which we could verify the gospel stories, for example, letters, diaries, transcripts, written at the time of the events, scholars suggest that reliable oral tradition was used by the gospel authors. But when you think about how stories grow with the telling and retelling, they're altered, they're embellished, especially over the course of several decades, it's hard to make the case for reliable oral tradition. And David Fitzgerald draws attention to just one of the problems. Who were these guys, after all, who supposedly got the ball rolling with the Jesus stories? One of the themes of Mark's Gospel is that the disciples were pretty dumb. For example, in Mark 6, we find the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with just a few loaves of bread. When we come to chapter 8, it's a similar scene, and again, Jesus suggests feeding the crowd of 4,000. What do the disciples say? How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? Duh, they'd just seen it done. For a long time, scholars have puzzled over this theme of the dumb disciples. We can be sure that the people who followed Jesus around didn't have pads of paper and pencils to write things down. How many rushed home to do that? And then there's the issue, obviously, of memory. Think about it. If you came home from church and were asked what the preacher had said, could you repeat exactly, without error, verbatim, even a few sentences from the sermon? And whatever you came up with and told somebody, if that person told another and that person told another, etc., for 40 to 80 years, would the words remain unchanged, yielding the authentic words of Jesus? One of the most well-traveled early Christians was the Apostle Paul, and in all of his letters, he doesn't mention the parables, the teachings, the miracles of Jesus. He doesn't seem to have heard of them. If there was reliable oral tradition carried on by the early Christian communities, how come Paul missed it all? And David Fitzgerald brings us back to how it all began. Were the disciples as dense as Mark says, or was that a literary device? Could anyone at the time have been trusted to get the words of Jesus exactly right? That's really a long shot. The Gospels cannot, after all, be trusted.